I'm glad that Angus Deaton won the Nobel Prize for Economics last year, because Angus Deaton makes that point very clearly, that there are enough resources, enough capabilities to ensure that no man is poor on this planet. But the problem is, do we have the political will? Do we have the commitment, both from how we organize the private sector and the thrust of policy choice, to make that happen?
As far back as 1985, a conference sponsored by the Aga Khan Foundation in Nairobi tried to set a pattern of development for Africa that was based on a tripartite engagement of the public sector and the private sector and what was then called, or typically is called, PDAs, private development agencies, or the non-government, not-for-profit organizations. Now these all have specific kinds of roles that they can play to stimulate economic activity, economic growth. PDAs are enormously powerful in education, which is fundamental to everything happening. You don't get the social sector right, the biggest investments we should be making should be in education and healthcare. Because unless people are properly educated and are well, you can't get them to do all the other things that need to be done. In fact, Jeffrey Sachs, who I've had the privilege of working with in producing the first Africa Competitiveness Report, argues in his book, End of Poverty, and in many of his writings, part of the challenge of Africa is destiny, location of Africa in the tropics, most people are dying from malaria, blah, 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 blah. His basic thesis is that the world should come together and help Africa overcome malaria, and therefore Africa will be able to produce. Of course, I don't agree necessarily with his suggestion, because I think that other countries in the tropics have been able to face development challenge and leak it. I do think, however, that there's no question about the social sectors, and they are important. We need to invest massively in healthcare. We need to invest heavily in education. That burden is usually shared by government and the so-called PDAs. And most of our educated people in the first generation went to mission schools in Nigeria. The missionaries came, they used education as the basis for spreading the gospel, and this education created the first doctors, the first, and so on and so forth, that, you know, saw us to where we are. At a point in time, for whatever reasons, governments began to take over the schools and managed to make a complete mess of them. Now some wise governments, like in Anambra State, in Lagos, have managed to find a way of returning those schools to those original owners. Some, like in Oyo State, are still struggling. My friend Ajimobi, the governor, doesn't seem to know how to go about doing that. But anyway, ultimately, development is about these three sectors finding ways of collaborating. The governors who are going to get development going in their states must be the governors that are able to identify the strengths of government and play to the strengths of government. Work with PDAs to get those critical sectors going, and then create an enabling environment that attracts investments. And those private sector investors are the ones who will create the wealth that will lead to the exports, that will end the foreign exchange, that will stop this kind of dependency that we have locked ourselves into. So that's where we are, and we must be working hard in that direction.